Hi there, happy Friday. This is a conversation that I'm hoping to have with you about how architecture can challenge conventions, and I believe that the best architecture actually challenges conventions. I was reminded of this when I was catching up on a little bit of TV. I'm not a big TV watcher, but every now and then it's great to have a busman's holiday and watch some grand designs or DIY SOS or one of these building programs. And I've just come across the latest BBC offering, which is called Your Home Made Perfect. And it was a really interesting program because it takes two award-winning architects and they design their own interpretation of a client's brief and for their home. And then the homeowners get to choose which of the two designs they would like to go with. And it was really interesting to see how these different architects were approaching exactly the same brief and dealing with the client. And one of the things that was really interesting for me was in the third episode where one of the architects who is particularly interested in challenging conventions and creating more transformative architecture proposed a solution for a couple who had a 3-bed house and they had quite a few children and they really needed to have a 5-bed house. So what this architect proposed was that he would completely change the whole floor plan, and instead of having individual bedrooms, he designed a plan that had sleeping pods, and it basically looked a bit like, you would sleeping in a box. And it was a really challenging design, and it reminded me so much about how we get advances and changes in our design and in our environment, and how that reflects on your culture, on your political or religious beliefs, perhaps on your financial status, on your family makeup, and all of these different things are really significant and in how you live your life. And your home can be a reflection of that, and you need your home to be able to house your needs and to support your lifestyle and create the spaces that you need to be able to live. So I thought it would be interesting to have a little look at different ways that architectural arrangements of homes have been transformed. And I'm just going to have a look at two different sort of very different kind of like the opposite end of the spectrum, if you like, to the two different types of house that you might find, and then what the advantages and disadvantages of those, and where you might choose to take one approach over another and why you might do that. So the simplest home is if you go back millennia and you look at sort of cave dwellings, not so much the huge complexes of caves, but individual caves. You look at tents, you look at very small huts, and which some people in different parts of the world, they still live in these kind of homes, and they often are very, very small, one room, and they're kind of like the ultimate open plan living, really. Everything happens in that space. Cooking, eating, some elements of housework, maybe sewing and things like that, and sleeping, making love, and everything in between. So everything happens in that one space, and there are lots of advantages to that, and there are lots of examples of this kind of space. And you can look at much more luxury property which have got this open plan approach. Certainly you find that in quite a lot of the Scandinavian sort of holiday homes where it be completely open plan. You'll maybe only have a little bit of screening from furniture between one type of use and another. And so this almost more of a multifunctional very flexible space that houses everything. And you might find there are lots of other examples. So like the tiny house movement, you'll find there are a lot of this kind of space where it's a very, very tiny space, but all of the different functions, maybe there'll be a bed that folds down, but then you can put it away. There might be a kitchen behind a cupboard, things like that, where you can adapt the space, but it's one space and everything happens in that. And there are advantages to this. So the smaller the space, the lower the cost of the build. Although if you're going to be looking at very complicated, bespoke sort of furniture solutions, then the cost per square metre might be a lot higher than an average build, but the overall cost is likely to be lower. It might mean that you're, a family living in that kind of space could be closer because you're sort of on top of each other all the time and you're always in the same space as each other. Whether that makes you a stronger family or not, that's it's up to debate. I don't know. It may do for some people, it may not for others, but these are things that you could consider for your own family, whether that would work for you or not. And it can take less effort to maintain because a smaller amount of space probably needs less cleaning, less maintenance. The wear and tear on that smaller space might be higher in a way because you're using it more of the time, but there's less of it to maintain. The disadvantages would be that there is really no privacy, and whether privacy is important to you or not could be a cultural thing, and whether it's desirable for you to have private spaces or not, that could be a cultural or a personal preference sort of thing. So that would be something to take into account. You might have to tidy away one thing before you can get on and do something else, so that could take more effort and make life a little bit more difficult. There may be frustrations in that. Depends a little bit on the kind of person you are, maybe. If you're happy to do something and then finish it off before you move on to the next thing, or if you'd rather be able to do something and maybe leave it in place and keep coming back to it for several weeks perhaps before you finished it. Say if you're into crafting or something like that and you've got a craft project on. So again, these are sort of the types of things that you enjoy doing at home, and how you enjoy doing them may impact on the kind of spaces that you want to have at home to allow you to do that. You may need to have a really high tolerance of others to be able to live in a single room type of open plan space, or it might make you a more tolerant person out of necessity because you're always on top of other people in their space, and so you have to be tolerant. So it might make you a better person. I don't know, maybe it would. I'd be interested to know what you think. Do you live in an open plan kind of space? Do you think that you're more tolerant of other people as a result of that? What do you feel about privacy? These are really interesting questions to answer, and when you're thinking about designing your home, thinking about how you feel about these different things can really feed into how then you design the space to suit you. In one single space, there may be a lot of smells and smoke or moisture in the air, and that can be difficult to control and isolate from one space to another. And there are ways of doing that with good ventilation and localized extract. You can deal with things like that, but it's something that may affect you. I mean, a lot of people have been for, probably about 10 years now, really. There's been a kind of a fashion of putting your bath in a bedroom, certainly in hotels. That's sort of going back maybe 15, 20 years, that's what people started to do that. And now you see that a bit more in high-end homes, where you have like a freestanding bath in the corner of the bedroom. Whether you think that's a great idea or not, or it's a bit weird, I'd say that is sort of like a convention that you would find your bath in your bathroom, and to then move the bath from the bathroom into the bedroom, I'd say that is a bit of a challenge to your conventional situation. And also in a single space, then there is dealing with sounds, so you can hear pretty much everything that's going on, at any time. Now there are different ways of managing sound, acoustic treatments that you can do, but it's still very difficult to prevent somebody in the same room from hearing something else that's happening in the same room. You can perhaps reduce the impact of that sound, but you're not necessarily going to be able to eliminate it completely. And then, so that would be, that's sort of if you're looking at an open plan space. And now these days, a lot of people are moving much more towards open plan living because they want to have more of a family lifestyle. They want to feel like they're together with the family more of the time. Certainly around sort of the evening time when you're cooking together, maybe somebody's doing some homework, somebody else is cooking, another person, I don't know, might be doing a jigsaw puzzle or something. So having these big open plan spaces does mean that you could all, in a family, you can all get on and do other things, but you're all still spending time with each other, and that is important for a lot of people. Whether that's important for you or not, that's very personal, but certainly that's a move that I've seen happening more and more. And then the sort of a contrast to the single room dwelling or the open plan space would be a sort of a more complex, compartmentalized type of home, like a Victorian villa, for example, where you've got really specialized rooms with really specific uses. So you might have a front parlour and a butler's pantry and an entrance hall. You'll have separate bedrooms, maids' quarters possibly, a breakfast room, kitchen. Maybe it'll even have separate stairs for servants and for, you know, the person who owns the home. There might be a nursery and a playroom, possibly a music room, maybe a room that's just for dealing with laundry and things like that. So all of these really specific requirements are housed in separate rooms, and that's like obviously a completely different approach to the open plan space. And it was designed, sort of Victorian villas were designed in a really hierarchical society where, you know, there would be servants or staff delivering a lot of the housework, although not necessarily not at different sort of levels of the society, because it was a very hierarchical society. So you would have the wealthier and the people who would have more servants, but even sort of relatively middle class people would probably have had somebody who would come, a housekeeper maybe would have come in and helped with some of the work, cleaning, maybe some of the cooking, laundry and so on. So there is they're interesting the way that the Victorian home sort of really reflected the society of the time. And that's really the case if you look at all, you know, houses throughout the ages. They really sort of start to reflect what the society is like. And we have a society that is really constantly changing. It's not a static thing like language. It develops and adapts as different things happen in the world. You know, at the moment now people are becoming more and more interested in sort of eco-friendly living, and that I'm sure is going to have an impact in terms of how people want to live. Maybe that means we're going to start to live more in more open plan space where you're just looking at heating one room. Maybe it means we'll go into separate, more individual spaces. I don't know. It'd be interesting to know. What do you think? How do you think that eco-plan, a more eco-design approach might affect your house layout, whether you're going to have more or less rooms, or what do you think? I'd be interested to know what you think. So the advantages of a home that's really compartmentalized and has like lots of different rooms is that there is lots of space for really complex activities and their equipment and the people who are taking part in those activities. You can have different things going on at different times in the same house and not necessarily, disturbing each other. There are really high levels of privacy. So, you can do something secretly in one room and somebody else in another room is not necessarily going to know what you're doing. And there's a lot of clarity in terms of how, what's going on socially, what's going on in terms of the use of the space and so on. But there are lots of disadvantages because it's very compartmentalized. It means that there's very little flexibility in how you might be able to use those spaces in different ways. But what tends to happen, it depends a lot on the value of the build and the sizes of the space. But in a smaller Victorian home, what you tend to find is because you've got these different rooms and they're all separated off, then they tend to be a little bit on the smaller side. So if you were opening them up, you can get much bigger spaces, and a bigger space allows more variety of activity to happen in that space, rather than a smaller space where you can feel a bit constricted and restrained, not as able to do all the things that you might want to do in that space. So these compartmentalized kind of buildings can sort of set up for more of a rigid approach to your lifestyle and has quite rigid conventions associated with it, and they're more expensive to build. There's a lot more walls and you need more space to have more rooms. So there are so many different disadvantages to it as well. So these different kinds of space, and if you go back to like Tudor times and so on, this idea of this one room, yes, there's sort of the sort of peasant hut kind of thing where you've just got the one room and the whole family's living there and sleeping there. But if you look at the sort of the lord of the manor, he would also just have one hall. It might be a much bigger hall, but it'd probably have a lot more people sleeping in there. But everything would also be happening, the cooking in there, everything, sleeping, eating, all the activity of the sort of estate maybe, that would still be happening in one larger space, but one space. And you might sort of just separate off spaces to an extent with curtains or screens, or four-poster beds and things like that would have come in at that time when people started to want a bit more privacy or warmth as well. But those smaller or individual spaces where everything happens was not necessarily a sign, just that layout on its own was not a sign necessarily of financial standing. But it can be a sign of financial standing, the scale of it, the amount of different rooms. Maybe if you look at some of the National Trust properties where they've got just enormous properties with huge amounts of rooms, whole wings of bedrooms for all these different guests that might be coming. So there's it can really reflect on your financial standing. It can reflect on your morals and your culture. It can reflect on your political and religious ideology. It can reflect on your family makeup and what you need for your family. So all of these different sort of elements to our really complex lives and societies and how we fit into those societies can be reflected in your home and the structure of your home. And you can adapt your home to make the layout of your home suit you better and how you fit into society, and how you relate to your close family and friends and other people who you maybe don't know, and how you interact. So maybe with your postman, or deliveries of parcels and so on, or maybe you have cleaners, people come and help you do various things in your home, cleaning your gutters, cleaning your windows, gardeners. All of these different things, you may be having lots of different things happening in your home, and how you deal with that, how you relate to all these different people, and how that reflects on your needs and your aspirations. It's really it can be really reflected in your home and the structure of your home. And a lot of people, you buy an existing home. It's fabulous if you've got the opportunity to buy a piece of land and build your own home, but for most people that's not the reality. You're buying a house that exists, and then are you going to just shoehorn yourself and your family into that house, Or is there something that you need to do to make that house work for you and really reflect you and your needs as a family? It's worth, I think, considering what is the convention and how do I fit into that conventional model, and where does that not really work for me, and where does that restrict me, and how can I change the way that I live that may be a bit of a challenge to that convention, but it will suit me better, and how can my home then be adapted or adjusted to make that work? Do you need to make any adaptations to make that work? Maybe not. For some ideas of kind of radical homes that you could look at for inspiration, I think it's really interesting to look at particularly like artists who often are quite ahead of their time. So Salvador Dali and his wife Gala have had a really interesting lifestyle. Obviously, a lot of it is shrouded in mystery, it's private, so we don't really know about exactly what went on in their lives. But their sort of home as a couple, they didn't ever have children, they lived as a couple. And their first home together was a fisherman's cottage in a small fisherman's village. And they actually bought multiple cottages, joined them all together and extended them, so it's really quite a complex home. One of the most interesting things about it is their bedroom, where they have this huge room and they have 2 4-poster beds. They each had their own bed, and then they each had their own bathroom and dressing room, so they're completely separate, and they really respected each other's individual space. But they had spaces where, yes, they were together, so they had a joint bedroom, but each having their own separate 4-poster bed within that bedroom meant that they had a degree of individual space as well. So it was a really interesting place to have a look at in terms of how they dealt with their sort of coexisting as a couple, as a married couple, and how they allowed each other freedom within their marriage to express themselves and to live in their own individual preferred ways. Later on, Dali then bought Gala her own castle, which is like an amazing thing, who wouldn't love their own castle? And Dali specifically said to Gala that he was only allowed to visit her in her new castle at her express invitation. So he gave her all this freedom of this amazing castle, all of her own, with its own grounds, and she could do with that home as she liked. It was hers, and he could only be there when she specifically, expressly invited him to come and visit, which is quite an interesting approach to married life, and certainly challenges many conventions. And so I think it's really fascinating to look at that. There are lots of other examples of really interesting lives of people and how they've changed their home to really function. For example, Frida Kahlo, Mexican artist, she had a really interesting married life as well. Again, another married couple who didn't have children. They were unable to have children, and the way that they designed their home was they sort of each had their own individual home that was linked by a bridge. So that's another very interesting approach to married life. Now, these are obviously really quite individualistic people, and that's maybe not at all how you want to live your life with your partner, your husband, your wife, and with your children, your family, your parents, your cousins, extended family, whatever. You may have a very different approach to your life, but it's really interesting to see what opportunities and what options you have. You don't have to just put up with a really standard kind of layout. You can really challenge that, use your own self and look at how you want to live. how you want to live as an individual, how you want to live as a family, and then reflect that within your home and how your home works for you. And that, I believe, is where the best architecture comes from, and also the best quality of life, because if you've got the space that really works for you, you're going to have, you know, a more enjoyable life, because your life will be easier, you'll be feeling more supported, and you'll have the space that you need to be you. I hope this has been inspirational in some way, interesting. I'd love to hear from you and know what you think about this. If you've got any interesting things to comment on, I would love to hear what you've got to say. And I look forward to speaking with you again next Friday. Goodbye for now.